Hello, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey everyone, welcome back to my office. It's time for another episode of Hypothesis, and boy, do we have a doozy today. We're actually, unexpectedly and accidentally staying in Appalachia this week. I guess the universe just wanted me to learn more about that part of the world because I've been putting it on the back burner far too long. And we are talking about Tennessee today, and we're talking about specifically Knoxville and urban revitalization and how the black community has been pushed around and pushed out of spaces that were created for it, or that they were able to gather in. And just what the government does when it doesn't actually support its people, even when it's saying it does. So my guest on the podcast this week is Cam Lewin. Camren A. Lewin is a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of Tennessee. Her research focuses on urban renewal in Knoxville, Tennessee, and its impact on community development and citizen participation in redevelopment efforts. She is particularly interested in class differences among the African American community and their varying conflicts with the Knoxville Housing Authority. In her free time, she volunteers for the Beck Cultural Exchange Center and Battlefield Farm and Gardens. Y'all, buckle up because this is an incredible episode. Please help me welcome Camren Lewin. But yeah, I'm very excited for this conversation today because your topic definitely is something that needs to be talked about and clearly is under researched. Which is very strange to me. But before we start talking about that, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your academic journey and what brought you to a PhD and what doing a PhD is like, all of that kind of stuff.
My academic journey is very me. I got my bachelor's from St. John's University in Jamaica, Queens. And I actually took college classes. I dual enrolled when I was in high school. And so when I got to St. John's, I was technically a sophomore in credits. So I graduated in 2018. And like as I was graduating, I thought I wanted to get a an MBA because in my mind I was like, well, if I want to be successful, I have to get a business degree. Like very fucking two-dimensional. However, like the day of my graduation, I realized that actually no, like I do love history. And like I noticed, um, so like the best advice I ever got was to never pay for graduate school. And so when I got the offer and I saw that there wasn't any funding with it, I was like, no, I'm not gonna go into debt with something that I'm just already unsure of, right? So I decided to fully just commit to my gap year, moved back to Florida, and then just started applying again. And let's see, I went in April. Yeah, so like the top of April, I got my accepted to go back to St. John's to the history department. I was like, okay, yay. And then I also went to Ghana because that year was the year of return, which commemorated 400 years of slavery, right? Um, so while I was there, Yeah, that was my first trip. When I was there, it just really hit that like, okay, yeah, like this is what I want to do, but I actually want to do African American history. Because I was telling my friend, like initially I thought I wanted to do African history just because I thought of like, oh yeah, like research trips, which I'm like, oh man, that's like shallow as hell, girl. So that's how I got started with African American history. Like, yes, I understand that like that's very like a general overview, but like that's all I had like at the moment. I still had time to figure it out. So as I'm in my master's program at St. John's, the pandemic hits. And so I technically was only on campus for one semester and I did my master's online for like the rest of my time there. And that was also an eye-opening moment because the school that I'm at now was not my top choice. It was not my top choice at all. I'm sorry, guys, but it's true. I originally wanted to go to Rice University in Houston, Texas. And literally, I'll never forget this day because I was doing work at my job and I looked at the website just to like make sure that I had all like my ducks in a row in terms of like what they want for my application. Then boom, we've decided to close the applications for the following year because we want to focus on our students. And I was like, fuck, but I respect that. So I was like, oh damn, I gotta pivot. And then I remembered that a professor that I admired at St. John's was actually at the school that I'm at now. And so I was like, you know what? Fuck it. And also, like, I have family in Nashville. Nashville and Knoxville are the same thing, right? It's just stupid. Um, but yeah, honestly, that's how I ended up here.
That's an incredible story. First off, in terms of your your experience with Rice, I also had originally planned on applying to Rice for
Mhm.
doctorate right out of my first master's. So my first master's was in opera, and I wanted to get my doctorate of musical studies. And one of my previous advisors had gone to Rice, and so she set me up with an appointment with one of her professor friends who was still teaching that program. I went to Houston, was not a fan of the weather, but I was like, if the school's good, I will deal with it.
Mhm.
Sat down with the professor, and he was like, don't come here. And I was like, wait, what? And he was like, don't do it. The school does not care about their doctoral students, blah, blah, blah. Like,
Mhm.
this isn't me telling people not to go to Rice, but we're also talking now 12 years ago when I was looking at this program. And he was basically explaining that because it's a private institution, they don't have any stake in whether or not their doctoral students finish. Um,
Oh.
yeah, so he was like, if you are not the kind of person who is completely self-driven and is willing to put up a fight against your professors every single day to make sure it finishes, don't come here. And I was like, great, that's not me. I'm not going to do this.
Hey, at least you were
um,
warned. It could have been worse.
yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it's just funny that was your experience at Rice, was that they were just like, no, we're going to focus on our students and
Yeah.
close it. Really, they probably just didn't want to deal with anyone more. But um but also I can't imagine, were you in Queens when the pandemic hit, or were you, so you were stuck in Queens?
Yes and no. God, you have me thinking all the way back. Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, I only ask because so I got stuck in London when it first started, but then I moved back to New York. So I was in Astoria for most of lockdown, and that was a
So
wild experience.
I was in Briarwood for like, 'cause I moved there at the, start of school. So like I'll say it's like September 2018.
Mm.
And then okay, yeah, I only stayed there until June. Yes, I only stayed there till June because my then boyfriend, now husband, we moved in together, but I left the city and instead we moved to New Windsor, New York. So, it's like I call it upstate because if it's not New York
Basically.
City, then I don't know where the fuck I am. But we moved there because also it was like, what's the point of like, why am I gonna pay this rent? If I can't enjoy the city, which, for safety reasons, of course, but it's like,
Yeah.
so we dipped.
Yeah, it was wild.
But yeah, the pandemic, man. Yeah, the pandemic in New York was awful.
I
I
mean,
remember.
there were parts of it that I loved as someone who likes doing touristy things but hates tourists. I say this with all of the love of my heart as a tour guide. Um, I loved the fact that I could go to Grand Central Station and Times Square and all of those places and no one was there. And you could
Hmm.
just kind of soak in the history of it and enjoy it for what it was for a few minutes. Um, but yeah, it was a very chilling experience to be in such a full city and have it
Yeah,
be so quiet.
yeah,
So you finished the rest of your master's online then.
yeah.
What was that like? Because I've only ever taken one class online because it was required in my master's program. Weird logistical thing. But I can't wrap my head around doing that much research and work by myself.
Yeah, it was definitely weird because when I was like looking into master's programs, I remember telling myself I don't want to do this online. And then boom, Um, it was an adjustment, but also like I was cool with it because again, I was a master's student, not a PhD, right? And so I think the professors did a good job switching, oh my God, over to Blackboard.
Oh
Oh
no,
my
not
God.
Blackboard.
Deep
Oof.
in the archive. Yeah. Blackboard and discussion questions and what was it called? Not Zoom, but WebEx. I think it was WebEx.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, I think they did a really great job adjusting because instead of like, like having like books required, my department was very small. Now that I think about it, definitely under 20 people, professor wise, maybe closer to 12 now that I think about it. But yeah, we weren't required to like read books because we couldn't, right? Nobody could go to
Mhm.
the library. No one can do the interlibrary loan. And so instead, they just like assigned us articles that were accessible. Um, but it was pretty good. Like I'm thinking back, like everyone did a great job with working with what they could.
Mm.
One thing I appreciated about St. John's, which I'm like, it's night and day with my school now, is that like I always had like night classes, and it wasn't until I came here that I realized, okay, yeah, it's because, for graduate school, right? Not everyone goes like straight after the BA. Like people have like
Mm.
real lives and, have jobs, and so they adjust to their schedules. So our classes were from 5 to 7 and then 7:10 to 9:10. So I was used to that schedule. And so like over here, classes are 3 hours long and they are throughout the day. Um, but I really think to tie back to your question that set structure like helped to like not feel too overly
Mhm.
overwhelmed with the changes. And again, because the department was so small, everyone was like super easy to talk to and like very understanding. Because COVID was, I'll say, I also had that like, I'll say like class awakening of like not everyone has access to Wi-Fi. I was like, okay, that makes sense. That's why some people like stay on campus for, those long periods of times because,
Hmm.
if I'm paying X amount of tuition, like I'm going to use up all the amenities. So, yeah, that was a humbling learning experience outside the MA.
Was that MA in history as well, or what was
Yeah,
your? Okay, so
yeah,
you've
that
done
was history.
history all the way through.
Yeah, yeah. I love
Dang.
history. My BA was history in the minor in Africana studies because basically that's what every Black person did. Literally. Yeah. My MA is like it's history, but it could be classified like as world history from St. John since like we studied another thing that was different compared to my program now is that like the history department at St. John's is so global. So like it's the global degree. But this history degree that I'm getting now, so as I'm here working on my PhD, I got a second MA, because it was en route, so it was kind of like, why not?
Mm.
So that one is American history, and this one I'm classifying it as African American history since that's my dissertation.
Well, and so talking about your dissertation topic, it's when I first started reading the proposal you sent me and then the first chapter you sent me, it was crazy to me that these are subjects that have yet to be researched because I guess and this is me showing showing my privilege in terms of where I grew up and how I grew up, but I guess it just makes sense to me that you would study African American people in those spaces and in those
Mhm.
states because of the history there. Like I don't understand how you can leave them out of those discussions. Um, but then narrowing it down into that like mid to late 19th century, like you think about the media and the books written about that time period, there isn't as much written about America in that time period as there is about Europe and England, and then even less so about Black people in New York during that time period. And then you think about Appalachia during that time period, and no one's talking about Appalachia during that time period except for a few people. So it just that narrowing down, I had to kind of rethink how I think
Yeah,
about how history is talked about because it's we're so I think the turn of the 20th century, it's so easy to get caught up in the kind of glitz and glamour of the Gilded Age and of the Victorian and the high class history that people forget that industrial history and they forget how the high class people were living the lives they were living.
yeah. Um, the one thing I have learned about this PhD journey is that you, number one, like you don't know everything. Like I knew I didn't know everything, but like just my coursework in general, right? Um, I don't remember how many. Yeah, I took 2 semesters worth of coursework. I think that's one, two, three, one, two, at least 12 classes, right? Some within my field, some without. And then I really realized, oh man, I don't know shit. And then as I research, right, at first that was like very daunting because when you read new books, you think, oh damn, that was a good idea, that was a good idea, that is a good idea. Like you think stuff has already been written, but like that's also why we have historiography, which is the study of history. And that's when you like find the gaps. And it's like, okay, like so and so like touched on this, but there really wasn't like that much of a deep dive. And then boom, that's how you find like your intervention. So like for me, for example, just broadly, I'm just gonna keep this very, very broad. There's not much written about Southern cities and their history. And that's just like in general, like the big cities like Houston, Miami, and Birmingham, they have like a reasonable I can't even talk, I'm so tired. A reasonable amount of books, right? But like not a lot or not as much compared to like these bigger cities in the west or in the north. So like Oakland, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, all that kind of stuff, right? Um, so that's one thing. And like, let's make it even smaller. Like you said with like Appalachian cities. People forget that because Knoxville is like Knoxville, they don't really know or like understand like how it is connected to the Appalachia mountain range like as a whole. And like yes, like in that kind of way, like Knoxville is related to Pittsburgh, even though it's kind of like, oh, that seems like a stretch, but it's like, not really, because there are experiences here that aren't the same, like as in Pittsburgh, even though, yes, these are both like urban spaces. Again, Pittsburgh is in the north and Knoxville is in the south, and every group has like that different experience.
How is it researching a city that is considered both the South and Appalachia as someone who isn't from that place? Like, are you finding there's a lot of pushback in how you're seeing things, or do you think that it's useful to come from a different background, from a different state, to be able to have that kind of third person, seemingly objective view on the situation there?
I would say I haven't gotten any pushback, but I also am like 95% sure it is because I am African American, right? And that like because I am talking about the Black community here, for me, um, I don't even know why I had a brain fart on. My bad. Am I bad for your live
No,
recording?
you're good.
So the reason why I bring up my race, right, is because I believe in community engagement. And I believe that because I am writing about a community, like I have to get involved. Um,
Mm.
so like that's why I think you've seen on my TikTok, like I do volunteer work whenever I can. And I I just talk to people. I talk to like Black Knoxvillians who are like generations deep. And like I've heard these stories about like how urban renewal has personally impacted them, right? And so like I have found that my questions and my curiosity like has been welcomed and has been fostered. Like
Mm.
oh man, I get random text messages from like folks who I've worked with or like we've gone out for like coffee or two. They're like see something about urban renewal like somewhere else and they'll be like, "Have you seen this video?" Um or like this one man, I love him so much. I'm gonna give him a shout out because I want his name to live in perpetuity. His name is Dewey Roberts Jr. And he gave me his book that he wrote. It's called My Moment in the Movement. And, because he is a civil rights activist. And I just finished writing about his dad, who his dad was a teacher here in the 1920s through 40s for sure. And his dad led the fight for Black teachers to have equal pay with white teachers here in Knoxville. And it's just been like so cool. Like as soon as his book came off the presses, he was like, "I want you to have it. Like I want, I want you to like to read about it." And like it's been so great because I call him up because like again, like working with the community, he is filling in gaps. Like when I'm in the archive and like I see some names and I'm having trouble deciphering whether they are black or white, and like a what is it called? Real quick, I understand, like there are plenty of races out here, right? And like, I'm sorry, I have to defer to the regular black and white dichotomy, but unfortunately, like that's how my archives are working. So I just want to put that in there.
Yeah.
So bringing it back to the archive, like there are some names that because there's like no race identifier, it's like kind of hard to tell a story. And then when I read Dewey's book, I was like, oh my God, I did not know this man was a black man. That changes everything. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I would say that like there's that, but it's also that because I listen to people tell their stories and I don't, try to insert the, well, actually, it happened. Da, 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 da. Like, I feel like people feel, like safe around me. And also a few of these stories, they are so good, but they also like challenge the national narrative, right? That like, Black people didn't care about their neighborhoods. And so it was up to these white officials to make sure that everything was okay and tear it down and rebuild it back up. And like when I'm talking to people on the ground, it's like, well, yeah, there were meetings, but these meetings happened in the middle of the day, whereas a majority of us, since they are not, the 1%, they're at work. So of course people are missing these meetings. Or you have folks who, major white officials who only talk to like the Black elite and like expected the Black elite, which yes, some were community members, but also like not all skin folk and kinfolk. But those officials expected them to like trickle down the message, even though technically speaking, it was not their job to. And so
Mm.
like hearing these stories, you get like a better sense of just the reality of, you know, what went on not only in Knoxville, but in all like in other like urban city centers.
I mean, that was something that really uh rang a bell for me in terms of the urban redevelopment and how it it pushed black families out of the center of the city into the suburbs and outwards, because I grew up in Seattle and the exact same thing happened in Seattle. The central
Yeah,
district used to be where all of the black families lived, and then the city came in and said, actually, we want to redevelop this because this is great land and it's in the middle of the city, so we're
yeah,
going to build it up,
yeah,
and priced everyone out as on purpose. Like it wasn't accidental that they did that.
yep,
But it was so interesting to read that I guess not interesting, it's frustrating,
mhm,
but relatable to read that the same things were happening across the country, and it's because it was coming from national laws. It was coming from Truman. It was coming from the highest levels of government saying, hey, we need to redevelop these spaces as a way to make cities whiter.
yeah,
And so it I guess I'm constantly on this path of trying to redefine how I see the South in my mind, because growing up in the North, it's very very much villainized, and that
yeah,
was yet another brick in that that pathway of actually these cities are very similar, and how they've treated their population is so similar. um Even to when people got their rights and when things were happening. I mean, the West Coast is seen as this bastion of liberalness,
yeah,
but in Oregon, black people weren't allowed to even own land until the 1980s. So,
yeah,
like,
which is insane.
it's truly insane. So it was not only eye-opening to me, but helped me kind of humanize or relate to that part of the country in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
Yeah. Like, and I like hear that sentiment a lot, especially sometimes when I'm back up north hanging out with friends and they're like, why did you go back to the South? It's so backwards. And it's like, it's complex. Like, because I
Mm-hmm.
study history, like it is just so complex. Like I will never forget a professor I was talking to, who moved from New York to down here. And like they gave me a heads up that the city of Knoxville, for some of these students, because I also TA, it will be their Manhattan. And at first
Mm.
I thought he was being dramatic because I was like, there's no way. But then when I got here and then like when my husband and I like took a drive to like the Smoky Mountains and we didn't take the highway,
Mm-hmm.
we took the back roads. And it was only like a 50-minute drive. But as soon as we got out of, like Knoxville metropolitan proper, I looked around and I was like, oh, like I did not realize how still like rural this this place actually is. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I don't know. Like I just I just get it. Like for example, last week we're now getting, the snowstorms and I'm just like, damn, I really thought we were going to be done. It's snowing right now. And the the city just shut down. And like what I mean by that is we and I get it. At first it wasn't like that much snow, but then black ice, right? And so I started getting emails from my school saying that like, we're just gonna cancel in-person classes Monday and Tuesday. You guys are gonna have to like go from Zoom. And for me, again, still in like the city proper, I'm like, it's not, I could drive my car right now if I wanted to. But then again, it hit like, okay, no, because these right now it's still kind of hilly and black ice. And I think I could be speculating. I don't know if the city had enough funds or foresight to, get more snowplows and get more ice. And so unfortunately, you have people who don't live in the suburbs like where I'm living right now, and therefore they can't get out. So it's interesting. I'm sorry I went on that tangent. But
No, I
it's
mean,
interesting.
I had the same kind of reaction when I moved to New York because growing up, I grew up in the suburbs of Seattle. And so Seattle to me was a big city. And I thought that I loved big cities because I grew up there and I would go into the city and be like, wow, there's so many people and so many kinds of people and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, even my first visit to LA was crazy because I was like, wait a second. I
Yeah.
got home and I was like, oh my God, Seattle is so white. Like, where are all of the other people? Because
Yeah.
I had never been outside of that situation. So what I thought was diverse was nowhere near as diverse as it could or should be. And then when I moved to New York, and lived in Brooklyn for the first year that I was in New York. I was in Flatbush, Brooklyn, like the only white kid for miles around,
Yeah.
and realizing again how small what I thought was a big city was,
Yeah.
and just kind of had to get over that feeling of being lost real quick
Yep.
and just learn the language and learn like get going. um be you don't know what you don't know, like
Yeah.
um and I can imagine that coming from the backwoods as it were, and huge sprawling rural spaces where your nearest neighbor is miles away, into any kind of a city, especially a city big enough to have suburbs, would be scary and
Right.
and culture shock.
For sure. For sure.
So in terms of your research specifically though, what are some of the things that you've started kind of noticing that are surprising to you?
I think the biggest shock for me is learning that there were some African Americans involved in, I don't know if I call it like the process of urban renewal, because they weren't in any like positions of authority, but they were aware. And so, like, what I mean by
Mhm.
that is this, the current narrative, at least like in Knoxville, for example, is that um, we had no idea what was going on until it was too late and all that kind of stuff. And like to a certain extent, like that is true. But then I realized that, like, you know what? We actually have to look at this through a class lens.
Mhm.
Because, yes, for working and lower class individuals and families, I can see how like they had nothing. They knew absolutely nothing was going on, right? But the 1% did. And I think that was the biggest realization for me, is that like I could not continue the black versus white, or I should I say white versus black dichotomy, because it was it was deeper than that. And like class is
Mhm.
important. Like, I don't know, I counted out my articles just like out of curiosity, like my newspaper clippings, just to like chronicleize the history of the Knoxville Housing Authority, which is the public housing authority in charge of slum clearance and public housing and urban renewal. And just for 3 years alone, I had like over 50 like articles, and I'm just like, oh, damn, this is deep. Um, but like as I'm reading them, I'm recognizing like uh in like the 1920s and 30s, they call them like race leaders, right? Which is again like the black 1% that white officials in theory respected them, but they still had no position of like real
Mhm.
um local legislative power. I will say that.
Mhm.
But like I'm seeing their names, and I'm seeing their names in rooms that I previously thought were closed to black people. I was like, oh wait, like, okay, well, it makes sense that like this man is here, like he owns like his own newspaper. Okay, it makes sense, like, oh, these three people are here because they're like physicians, right? They have the money. And so realizing that, you know, 1% of the black elite was aware of urban renewal and like what it meant, I was like, ah, okay, then this is actually a little bit deeper than I thought. But I also appreciate it, right? Because a lot of scholarship paints African Americans as just passive victims of urban renewal, right? And what I'm hoping my research will show is that, like, it will, one, be a reminder that we are not all a monolith. And two, like there are some people who value class over race solidarity. So it's been interesting wrestling with that, but also like it's a reality. I'm also do a shout out to Dr. Augustus Wood, because his book has changed my life for the better. It's called Class Warfare in Atlanta, and it just came out last year, and he's talking about um intra-racial class conflict and how the Black bourgeoisie was involved with gentrification of the lower class. And like he makes a fantastic argument, which you guys have to read the book. It's not full of like inaccessible scholarly mumbo jumbo. He's very straightforward. He's an excellent storyteller. But reading his book, I'm just like, okay, so I am onto something because we have similar sources in a sense. Like he got his stuff from like oral histories, newspapers, and journals, and I'm getting that on my side at this end too. So it's like, all right, like we are recognizing that pattern. Um, so it's been a fun journey because at first I thought like I was betraying myself in a sense that like, oh no, like did Black people really do this to others? And I'm like other are other Black people? And it's kind of like I had to think and sit with myself, be like, yeah, and why not?
Mm.
Like, why not? And that is the that's the part I like had to reckon with. But because I'm now looking at it at this lens, I have so many other sources, which has been really
Yeah.
fantastic.
Well, I mean, humans are human, and we're all going to do things that ultimately could be against our better judgment, because in the short term they could help us selfishly. I mean, within queer studies, there's a huge push right now to stop the narration that all queer people are good and all queer people are angels, because then when there's that one bad person, it begs the question, okay, then
Mhm.
was it all a lie, or do we just admit that we're all human instead and start looking into these stories and expressing the
Right.
complexities and
Yes.
digging into
Yeah,
what led people to make those decisions?
exactly.
Well, and one of
Exactly.
the things that I'm wondering is, because of the time period you're looking at, I mean, we're just coming out of the Civil War. So they would have had family involved in that. And Tennessee was such a divided state during that conflict. How is that playing into this urban renewal and the people who are involved in both sides of it?
Yeah. So what's interesting about Knoxville is that it's located in East Tennessee, right? And so East Tennessee actually did not want to be a part of the Confederacy. They were pro-Union. So when I learned that, I was like, oh, okay, this is what adds to the complexity. And what I mean by that is because East Tennessee, geographically speaking, is different from Middle Tennessee, which is, I'll say Nashville, and then West Tennessee, which is Memphis, is that plantation slavery. So, like,
Mm,
sugarcane, even though there was definitely the soil was not good for that, and cotton, that did not take hold here as
mm,
much as it did in the other regions of the state. And so slavery was more of domestic and farmhand type of labor, which some can argue was a little bit more intimate, which
mm,
still trying to figure out how I feel about that. But because of this, like the paternalism, I think was a little bit more intertwined and complicated. And that paternalism carried on after the Civil War. Like Charles W. Chancellor, who, like, his mother was the first Black teacher for the city of Knoxville in I think it was 1867, 67 or 66. Actually, no, it was 64. Sorry, I got a lot of dates up here.
yeah.
Um, she was the
Historian
first,
brain.
yeah. She was the first Black teacher with General Burnside. She created the Burnside School because she named it after him because she got permission to have the school there. And he was also part of the Union, right? So I bring Chancellor up because in 1917, there is an uptick of racial violence in the state of Tennessee, like as a whole. And so, like, there's an increase of just lynches and deaths and all that, all the like. And so he wrote to Governor Rye this letter pleading for him to like, say something like talk about the violence. And then like I'll never forget this because this really like I was like, he mentioned like, something to the effect of, we're can you like at least remember the loyalty that the black man had like during slavery when Union soldiers came down and like blacks stood by your side. And I'm just like, because, did he come from an enslaved? Yeah, he did. Like, he did come from enslaved parents, but they were enslaved in a different state. And so I'm just kind of
Mm.
like, what are you talking about? Because your parents they migrated over to Tennessee, but like I know what he's talking about, but at the same time, I hope y'all get it. So like it's that type of paternalism that trickled onward. And I can give an example before that letter in 1917. In 1886, so we are talking out of Reconstruction, 20 years removed from the Civil War, there was this newspaper in Knoxville, and it's called the Knoxville Journal. And they reprinted an article that was printed by a local paper called The Negro World. And what's interesting is that the Negro World was critiquing a reverend in Alabama. Um, they didn't really give the specifics of like what that man said in that article in Alabama, but their conclusion was like, the black race is never going to progress if we continue to, harass white people. And so the Knoxville Journal took that article from the Negro World and said, this is why black people in Knoxville can prosper because they know their place. And I'm just like,
Oof.
wow. And there were um folks who like wrote in and like agreed with that sentiment. And I'm just like, damn. And a more recent example, which I just read last night, was from the Knoxville Flash Herald, which is a black-owned newspaper. And it was published in either 1939 or 1940. And this is important because remember I talked to you about Dewey Roberts, right? Well, his dad, Dewey Roberts Sr., who led the fight for equal pay amongst all types of educators in Knoxville in the city, right? Um, that happened in December of 1939. And so like he's getting praise from around the world. I don't know around the world, maybe, but at least like nationwide, right? We got New York, Amsterdam, um, saying congratulations to Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Carrier. So like his name's carrying weight. And this article stood out to me from the Knoxville Flash Herald because at the end of it, the editor said, "Didn't we tell you? Like we've been telling you guys for years that Knoxville has the most progressive leaders in the South, and this is the best move. This is the best decision they've made since the emancipation of the Negro." And I was like, I said, what are you talking about? Because this battle that Dewey Roberts Sr. was in, right? It was a 7 year type thing. And in the newspaper, like reading these articles was so frustrating because I'm reading the white articles, the white newspapers, and they're talking about taking their cases to the city council in Knoxville. Like city council makes like a majority of the decisions and they are just dismissed. Like I'm reading it, you can kind of detect the tone saying like we know this is going on, like we'll find it in the budget. It is what it is. And it's a 7 year battle. So knowing that it took 7 years, And we have this black newspaper saying, didn't we tell you like our leaders were progressive? I'm like, were you even paying attention? You know? And so like that type of attitude, like from the Civil War and even like before that, like has always been passed down in Knoxville. And it's just that that is just it's interesting and it's frustrating a lot of times because it's like you see that popping up again in the 60s as well as there's a I think there was two major civil rights moments in Knoxville. And during that time, in 1963, Knoxville gets this recognition from Look magazine saying that Knoxville is an all-American city, and look at its urban renewal project, and it's just so great. But ironically, as Look magazine is making plans to come to Knoxville to present this award to the mayor and blah, 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 it's segregated seating. And so you have blacks protesting it because it's like, if Knoxville is so great, if Knoxville is so all
Mhm.
American, why is there still segregation?
Yeah.
So I know that was like a long-winded answer, but like
Yeah.
this is how history is.
Well, and it reminds me of how newspapers and media look at the national civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s as well, in looking at like MLK Jr. versus Malcolm X, and white newspapers really wanting to lionize not just the people that they see fit to lionize, but the specific moments where they say
Yeah.
where they can use what is said to still kind of quote unquote put people in their place, and like the language around making sure that protests are always peaceful because it's easier to quash a peaceful protest than it is to have people actually standing up to their government,
Yeah,
etc. So I mean, I would argue that some of those sentiments are still going on, and the
for
way
sure.
that these things are being reported are still there. The I mean, the media is always looking for a way to fit their bias into what they're saying.
Yeah,
So it is interesting to hear that was already the modus operandi at that point, that we had just finished this major war that pitted people against each other, pitted families against each other, and was supposed to be the end of some of those fights, and yet really all it did was just kind of shove it down and make people figure out new ways to word things.
yeah.
Ooh. Um so in terms of the actual urban revitalization, the physical changes that were going on in the city, I know from what you sent and reading what you sent that the projects were part of that, like the projects in New York, the projects all across the country. What were they trying to solve with those? Like
Yeah.
what was the actual problem there?
So slum clearance started off, God, with no, I'm thinking of public housing. Anyway, so like I said, this brain. At least in Knoxville and the state of Tennessee, again, I'm so tired. Yes, it is the state of Tennessee in general. Um, they created legislation in 1935 to establish a public um, entity that would address slum clearance, and then public housing and urban renewal came later on. And like, yeah, some of the cities they were just dirty, right? They were gross, they were slums. But most of the times it was because the local government really did not care. We also have like instances of redlining. And also, even though what may look like a slum to you, for somebody that is their home. And it's also a
Mm-hmm.
home they don't have to pay rent or mortgage for. And so
Mm-hmm.
people were content with living in these conditions to a certain extent, but also because of redlining, they weren't allowed to move anywhere else. Um, Also, the city had yet to provide, just what is it called? A sewer system. And there also weren't any kinds of like housing codes yet. I was reading
Mm-hmm.
up a book on Nashville, and I believe they didn't really get codes until like the 30s and 40s. And that's like another thing that I found interesting, like in the archive. Basic things that we take for granted, people had to learn, like pamphlets on like how to take out the trash or like how to upkeep a lawn. And like at first I read it and I was like, okay, this is a little patronizing. But as I'm reading like in the newspapers of like these slum conditions and just how like people were living, I'm like, okay, like I get it. So the purpose of slum clearance was to first just clear the areas, but to also give people standard housing. And what standard housing entailed was electricity, running water, and a toilet. um, I'm reading up on a fight right now between gas stoves versus coal stoves, which is pretty interesting. I didn't even know that was a thing. So like talk about environmentalism right there. But that was essentially it. And unfortunately, again, Blacks were primarily targeted because those were the conditions that they lived under. Because again, they could not leave due to, I keep repeating redlining. I just read up on the HOCL, and essentially they created these residence security maps. And what these security maps were basically like, if this person lives or is running a business in this red area, then like no, like it's risky to give them a loan, right? It was a way to like save like property value. And a few years later, with the National Housing Act of 1934, out of that came the Federal Housing Administration. And so they solidified redlining with basically saying that, like, you can't intermix race because like you are asking for trouble essentially, and it's also going to bring down like property value. So because of that, banks would not loan to Black people also to like move out into the suburbs, right? Because it's like the suburbs is where the white people are. And we're not going to help with this integration, intermingling, whatever. You guys have to stay exactly where you are. And so with urban renewal, well, I wouldn't say with yeah, it was with urban renewal eventually. But yeah, like with urban renewal, all that came to a blows. And I'm gonna stop talking now because my brain needs time to catch up. But I hope that all made sense.
No, I really get that. And I mean, it's fascinating to see that uh, the problems, again, it's not fascinating. Really, it's just sad. But
Mhm.
the problems that Black people are blamed for in a lot of situations are white people's, like the the after effects of specific targeting by the white people in government. And so
Yeah.
for them to come in and say, oh, well, these places are dirty and disgusting. You obviously need help to make it cleaner. Like, I guess we will do our best to come in and help you.
Yeah.
Well, great, because you were the ones that caused this to happen in the first place. Like, what are
Yeah.
you? I mean, we see that with the US government, both at home and abroad, the
Yeah.
creating bad situations, then going in and being like, well, I guess we have to be the savior now.
Yeah.
And then really not saving anyone and making the problem worse. But it's, I mean, the the classism of it all is so crazy to me because I mean, I haven't been to the South and I haven't seen these places in Knoxville and Nashville and Atlanta and that. But even in New York, like you walk into the projects in New York, or you walk into Alphabet City, or you walk into these specifically government funded neighborhoods that were built up to get rid of these slums, and it's still evident that the government doesn't care about these spaces.
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
built them and they put them there and they said, great, now you have a good place to live, and then they left them alone.
Yeah. Like I have a good like I read this book. It's fantastic. It's called The Politics of Public Housing by Rhonda Williams. And like it talks about public housing and like the evolution of it, of like first how the government like encouraged politics within these buildings, like advocate for yourself, create these coalitions, like hold management accountable. And it's interesting how it goes from that to like essentially like being abandoned. And now these people are being villainized. They're seen as welfare queens and like trying to drain the system. And like, I highly recommend anybody to read that book, even though it is set in Baltimore. You can see these patterns like everywhere where there is a public housing facility.
Do you is any part of your research looking into actual like solutions that could be uh come up with from looking at the history, or like where how do we use that history knowledge to inform how we move forward? I feel like that's a conversation that's coming up a lot right now with current politics is, well, this is happening again because people don't know their history, and it's like, well, we can know our history, but if we're not plugging in those pieces,
Mhm.
it doesn't do us much good. So I guess really my question really is, how do we look at your research and find practical ways to move forward?
And honestly, that is a great question. Because I'm just writing a dissertation, um, my people are not looking for solutions in a sense that like using my research to like apply here, 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 here. Right now, my purpose is essentially like a writing exercise to like explain how we got here. Um, so I say that is a really good question. For me personally, just to learn. Um, because I will say, what is it, 2026? So I'm 6 years behind. Knoxville actually, the city of Knoxville actually formally apologized for urban renewal back in 2020, with
Wow.
Councilwoman Gwen McKenzie. Like she got the city to apologize, and to recognize the damage that it caused to the Black community. And I believe, God, I don't know, it had to be maybe it was either $100,000 or $100 million. Or maybe 10,000. Anyway, money has been promised. I know it's a big amount, but money has been promised essentially to like rectify the wrongs of urban renewal. However, we will see, right? Like
Those promises have been made in the past.
those promises have been made in the past, and like Knoxville is trying its best because they like It's interesting. Um, in 2021, the city has a minor league and it's called the Smokies, baseball minor league. And at first, they were playing in Kodak, but they decided to bring it back to Knoxville. And the debate was, it was very interesting to watch, because the president of my school, he technically paid for the stadium. It's his stadium, it's his name. Everyone knows that. And what makes me angry about the stadium is because where it sits at was part of the first urban renewal residential project, which is Riverfront Willow, also known as the Bottom. And long story short, because I don't want to be here all day boring your audience, they bulldozed Riverfront Willow, and a majority was left vacant. Like the city had no plan. Originally they were gonna run a highway through it, but they had to like switch that up, and they chose to like do that to another black neighborhood, parts of Mountain View.
Why
But
ruin one black neighborhood when you could ruin multiple?
yeah, I know, right? Like, why not? Um, and a Knoxville native, I'm gonna shout her out because I love her, Dr. Javiet Samuel. She took me on the tour where the when the baseball stadium was still being built. And like she was telling me how like back in her day, like when she was in high school, this was all a parking lot to like party and drink in the 90s. And I said, the 90s? Because they tore this down from 1954 to like 1967. And like parts of it have been rebuilt by white folks. Right now it's called the Old City. The other part lay dormant. So it wasn't until, you know, articles now will say that like Randy Boyd, who like that's his baseball stadium, like saved the day by creating the space and like job employment and blah blah blah. I'm just like, but the city had all this time.
So
So
much time.
so much time. So that is one part of my personal grievance, but I will say that like the Black middle class in Knoxville has done a great job in asserting themselves. So anybody who comes to the baseball stadium, they can and will remember that, you know what, this was a Black space first and foremost. Um, an apartment complex is named, I think it's called like Yardley Homes, Yardley Apartments. It's named by William F. Yardley, who was the first Knox County attorney who was African American. And right beside it, on the other side, we have the Delaney, which is going to be a residential building and like some other type of space as well, named after Buford Delaney. Buford and Joseph Delaney were Black. Well, yeah, no, of course they were Black. They were Harlem Renaissance, famous Harlem Renaissance painters. Their house was destroyed by urban renewal. And there are statues of the Knoxville Giants, which was they were part of the Negro League. And
Mm,
so there are statues of them. There's a lot of Black in there that like if you're just like a natural history buff who's like, oh, I'm curious about like what this says, like you can read up about it a little more of like Black Knoxville. So for me, that's a mini kind of solace that I take, that, even though they're transforming this space, there are still parts of Black remembrance, which I think is very important.
it is definitely important, especially in a time where we're seeing a lot of those being torn down in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
We need to be fighting for those to stay or to be expanded instead of being torn down, because that history is necessary for us to know.
yeah.
Well, I think that gives us a good segue into my synthesis questions.
All right.
So this is a series of 7 questions I ask all of my guests. Um, don't have to think too hard about them, just whatever comes to mind first. And the
Okay.
first question is, what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Ah, man, I watch the dumbest TV shows. I'm not gonna name them because I have been judged harshly. But just know that like shit, this the stuff that I study, it gets you here today. It's heavy. So if I need a little something stupid, I will gladly take it.
Smart. What is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Oh man. Any Anywhere. As long as I have my noise canceling headphones and a good playlist and my dual monitor, like I could work anywhere.
What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this could be
Oh
good or
man.
bad.
Ha, ha. Man, fuck these kids. Okay, I'll give some context real quick because that is important. I yeah, this was my second semester being a TA. And he's also a black man. And I was just telling him how I was struggling because yeah, like, still a minority. In my program in total, one dude dropped. There's only 4 of us African Americans. So you can only imagine what it's like with the undergrad pool. And I'll never forget, like this kid was like trying to get me in trouble with the professor ITA for. Luckily, they don't believe students when it sounds so like obvious that's stuff that we wouldn't do. And so I was just telling him how I was just like, I'm glad my instructor is my instructor, but like it just sucks. He's like, Cam, I'm gonna tell you something. Fuck these kids. And like when I tell you that has like helped shift my mind, because yeah, like respect, like some of these students are like little shits, and they think just
Mhm.
because mommy and daddy are paying for their education, they can just do and say whatever we want and we get reprimanded. So he was just like, keep your head up, keep doing what you're doing. Like this won't always last.
I had to have one of those moments too when I was a GTA where I was teaching a course. And I mean, it wasn't a student trying to get me fired, but I got to the end of the semester and 2 of my students got Fs. And I was just like, oh no, I failed my students. What have I done? Like, I'm a
Yeah.
terrible teacher. And I went to my advisor, and my advisor was like, this is college. Your class is not difficult. If
Yeah.
they got an F, they were trying to get an F. That's
Yeah.
not like, fuck that shit. Leave them
Yeah.
alone. Like, move forward.
Yep. Yep.
um, if you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
God, I wouldn't. Like,
Mm.
damn, this is complicated. In terms of like what I'm writing for my dissertation or like just like history in general.
Or in general, any topic ever. Like, any discipline, any if you weren't doing history, what would you be doing?
Nothing. I told my friends in another life I'd either be like an IG baddie, or I'd be like a content creator, like full time. Like it's really that stark. It's either one or the other.
Mm. Hey, it's good to know that. Who is one other academic whose research you really admire? And you've
Oh
listed a
my,
few, but who's
yeah.
another one that you'd like to talk about?
Give a shout out to goddamn. Ashley Howard. She just recently wrote a book on like urban rebellions in the Midwest in the 1960s with an emphasis on Black communities. And I met her before in person. Like she's just a fantastic, brilliant scholar.
Nice. What is a question you've never been able to answer?
What are you doing here? Shit, it's a question I ask myself. Like now that I think about it, I always ask, why am I doing this? Um, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna just leave it at that.
Okay. And then last question. What font do you wish you could present your research in?
The font, Century Gothic. Like
Ooh,
that is my go-to for any type of like creative writing that I do. That's my favorite, 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 favorite.
nice. And where can people find you online?
Oh God. Okay, so you can find me on TikTok at Cam the Historian, but it's Cam with three M's. And on Instagram, it's Cam Reviews Books. Because I started my Bookstagram page before TikTok. I started out at the same time, but then like I gave up on TikTok and focused on Bookstagram. Um, but I've started to like put more like grad school content on there as well. And believe it or not, when I have the free time, I do read fiction because again, the stuff is heavy, and so it's a nice little break.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me. It's been an incredible conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ira.
And we will talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye.
A huge thank you again to Cam for being on the podcast. It was really a pleasure and an honor to get to talk to you today and learn from you today. I really hope that this opens up the doors to a lot more questions for people and helps them kind of reassess where they have thought amiss of some of these topics. I think it's really important to talk about the complexities in issues and not just see them as simple black and white, but also the class divide is such a huge thing that is so overlooked in so much research. So thank you for the work you're doing, and I'm looking forward to reading it when it's done. And thank you to all of you for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. If you would like to have a question read on the air, please submit a question. We would love to answer them. You can submit those on Instagram at hypothesispod. You can also send them via email at podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to hear your voice on the podcast, who wouldn't want to hear their voice on the podcast? You can send us an audio note at speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. Again, that's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. If you'd like to read Cam's research proposal, you can find that on Substack, as well as all of the articles from all of my past episodes. I can still talk, I promise. Those are all on my Substack at iramcintosh.substack.com, along with other articles that I write. So please follow me over on Substack. You can also find us on TikTok at The Gay Ethnographer, or you can find my personal Instagram at Ira A. McIntosh. Please subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends. This podcast goes nowhere if people don't share it. It's all about you. So thank you for your support so far. Let's keep it going. And when you listen to the episodes, make sure you download them so that it helps those numbers. Let's fight misinformation together. Have a wonderful day and go read a book. Bye.